Hi, good morning, 5K, or good afternoon, whatever time you are listening to this. This week, we are going to be done talking about the Native Americans for the most part, and we're going to keep learning about someone else who lived a long time ago. I'm going to be reading to you every day a little bit from this book, and then we'll make our way through all of the book. We are going to be learning about pioneers. Say pioneer. Yeah, say it one more time. Say pioneer. A pioneer is somebody who lived a long, long time ago. Next week, and then the following week after Thanksgiving, we're going to be learning about the Pilgrims, the first people who came over here to America. Um, and the pioneers came after the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims came first, and they lived here in America. And then the people started to move west, like here where we live. And they went out towards California to find new land. And so the pioneers were the people who moved from over on one side of the country to the other side. Those are the pioneers. So we are going to learn about the pioneers. So this book is called Traveled West in a Covered Wagon. So I'm going to talk to you about that. So here, the first page that you see is some of the states a long time ago. So Wisconsin's over here, it's off the page, and you can see this little red trail, that dotted line, that shows that they were traveling west. And some people stopped in Nebraska, some stopped in Colorado, some stopped in Idaho, some people made it all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so they kept traveling to find new land, to try to find gold that was buried in the ground, and to find a new place to live and to spread out and to explore this new country that they had just come to. Okay, so those were the pioneers. Say pioneer. Awesome. This whole unit is one of my favorites to teach you. So the first thing says, what was a covered wagon? Let me show you. I'm going to hold this picture up while I read to you about it. It says a covered wagon was a wagon with a white rounded top made of cloth. Do you see that? And that's me. This is when Mr. Barch and I first got married. We went on our honeymoon out to Colorado. They had a covered wagon there, and I was sitting in it. It says the cloth was called canvas and was rubbed with oil to make it waterproof. So when it rained, the water couldn't get into where the people and the kids were and their food was. It was stretched over big wooden hoops. You see those inside that bent from one side of the wagon to the other. There were drawstrings in the front. You see those here. 1, 2, and there's some in the back. If you pulled the strings tight, you could close up the end to keep out the rain and the wind. So if you pulled these strings, this whole white canvas would close shut so that the wind and the rain could not get through. The canvas could also be rolled back on the long sides so that you could get a breeze on a hot day. So on this side right here, you could roll this up so that the breeze could go through if it was really, really hot. The bottom part of the wagon looked like an ordinary wagon with one difference. The front wheels were smaller than the back wheels, and that made it easier to make sharp turns. Inside the wagon, there were hooks on the wooden hoops. There aren't any in this wagon, but in their wagons a long time ago, there would have been hooks so that you could hang milk cans, guns, bonnets, spoons, dolls, jackets, and anything else there was room for. So this is a covered wagon because I told you there were no cars, right? And at this point, there really weren't trains yet. Trains had not been made. And so if you wanted to move somewhere else, you had a wagon with all your stuff and your family in it and a horse or an ox. We learned about oxen in the book of Oswald. They pulled it all that way. So that's a covered wagon. Here is Mr. Barch standing by a covered wagon. So you see how these sides are latched down. So on those hot days, they would roll those back so the wind could blow through. And it's kind of hard. You can't see the other wheels here to see that the back wheels were bigger than the front wheels. Here you kind of can. You can see that the back wheels are way taller, right, than the front wheels. That's a covered wagon. It says, underneath the wagon between the back wheels, there was a hook with a bucket full of grease hanging from it. The grease was rubbed on the wheels so that they would turn smoothly. You wanted the wheels to turn because if there got mud and other stuff and rain that made them stick, then you couldn't go with anybody else. Now, it says the wagon was pulled by oxen. We know what those are, big, strong cows, mules, which are donkeys, or horses. Many pioneers used oxen because they were stronger than donkeys and horses. And it says covered wagons were also called prairie schooners. The prairie is this flat land. Do you see any trees there? No, the prairie is all grass. Prairie schooners. It says a schooner is a boat that sails on the sea. The big white canvas to cover the wagon looked like a huge sail, like on the sailboat. And if the grass was tall enough to hide the wheels, the wagon looked like a big boat sailing across the grassy green waves. Here, the grasses have turned brown because it's probably fall. But so look at these ones out here. They just look like boats floating along the grass because you can't see their wheels. Do you see just one wagon going at a time? We're going to talk about why we see many of them together. It says, what is a wagon train? It says a wagon train was a group of covered wagons that went together on the long trip out west. The wagons would travel in a single line so that from a distance it looked like a slow moving train. If the trail was wide enough, they would sometimes spread out to get away from each other's dust. At night, the wagons would form a great big circle with the front of one wagon facing the back of another. Children would often play inside the wagon circle after dinner and just before bedtime. Now, why do you think they made a circle out of their wagons? Why don't you think they all just parked their wagon in their own spot with space in between them all? They did this to keep each other safe. So everybody was always watching out for each other's wagons, and the kids always played inside to be safe from wild animals, wolves, snakes, coyotes. So the kids played in here. The parents would watch around the outside so they were safe. So they did this for safety. And last week we learned about the Potawatomi Native Americans. There were Native Americans all over these lands because they had lived here always. And some of them were very, very nice, and they would trade with them and help them. And some of them were not nice, and they would try to kill the pioneers. So what you did, because they didn't want them on their land. So what you would do is you would make a wagon circle. The wagon train would make a circle at night so they could all help keep each other safe, and so the kids could be safe in the middle. Pretty smart. There was always a wagon leader. And then at night, they would sit around the fire and talk about what had happened that day. Hey, I'm running out of flour. Do you have some that you could give me to borrow? Hey, my wheel broke and I need somebody to help me fix it. Or, hey, my child's really sick. Do you have any medicine? Do you know something that could help my child? So the grown-ups at night would sit around the fire while the kids were sleeping and talk about the things that went well that day or things that were happening that they needed help with. And then the men would talk about, hey, we should go probably hunting tomorrow, try to get a buffalo so we can feed our family. So the men would figure out when they were going to go hunting. Oh, and then at night, they'd also pick a man who would stand guard all night and watch and make sure all the wagons were safe, all the children and families were safe, and all the animals stayed safe from wild animals or Native Americans. It says, what kinds of people traveled west? It says many different kinds of people traveled west. They wanted to live in a new place. So farmers wanted to go find new land. Storekeepers wanted to set up new stores and shops. Carpenters, people who build things out of wood. Bakers and blacksmiths. Blacksmiths were people who made things out of like iron and steel. Missionaries, so like pastors, shoemakers and artists and lawyers, doctors, teachers, anybody that you could think of wanted to travel west. They wanted to make a new life in a new place. Look at even little babies traveled west. It says, what would your family bring in their covered wagon? It says, you would bring as much as you could pack. It was necessary to leave behind everything you didn't need, especially if it was heavy. The oxen and horses pulling the wagons had a hard time just walking across the country. And if the wagons were too heavy, the oxen would die from exhaustion, from being too tired and overworked. So it was very important to figure out how much food you would need, what kind of clothes you would need, the blankets, and what pots and pans you would need. And then you'd leave everything else, even things that you really liked. But if they were too heavy and you didn't need them, they stayed behind. because you didn't have a lot of room inside your wagon and you didn't want your oxen to die. But if you had cows, your family would bring those along because then you would have milk, right? And then if you were really hungry, if you couldn't find anything to eat, you could eat your cow too. They knew that they would be able to hunt and find berries and all that kind of stuff on the prairie too. It says the pioneers made their own clothing. So your family brought along cloth to sew with needles, thread, pins, and scissors, leather to fix your shoes. So they brought all that stuff, hammers, saws, string, nails, knives, because if you had to cut something, or when you got to the new place, you needed to build a house, you needed a saw, right? To saw down the trees and build your wood cabin. Those are all the kinds of things they would bring. Water, you needed water. If it didn't rain for days and days, you died without water. All right, so it says you would also have to do chores. You see this little girl right here? She would have to bring things like soap and wax for making candles, lanterns, and wash bowls. So you could make your own soap. You'd have to make your own candles. You'd have to wash the lanterns, wash the food or the bowls that you ate out of. Many people brought tents to sleep in outside when they weren't sleeping in the wagons. And if they hunted buffalo on the trail, they would often use the skins for making blankets, just like the Native Americans. With the fur on the inside, a buffalo skin was warm and soft. It was also important not to forget medicines in case somebody got sick on the trip. Nobody forgot plates, knives, forks, spoons, cups, and pots and pans. They were kept in a special box attached to the back of the wagon so you all could eat. And they always left, it says, what time of year did they travel? They always traveled like May, June, July, August, during the summer months, because you didn't want it to be too wet and rainy, and then your wagon would get stuck in mud and your oxen would, and then if you can't fit in someone else's wagon, you might die, your oxen might die, so that was bad. So you didn't start too early. All right. There were no bridges, my loves. So you would have to find a shallow part. That means not a deep part of the water to try to cross. So look at what's happening here. That wagon tipped over and all the things are floating away. That man's trying to save his stuff. The horses, look at how deep that horse is. Horses stand so tall and high. So there were no bridges, my dear. So if you had to cross a river, you had to find a shallow place. Otherwise, you weren't getting across. Isn't that scary? Sometimes all your stuff would float away. It was dangerous. Being a pioneer was dangerous. All right, my loves, this is where we're going to stop today. Tomorrow, we are going to learn more about traveling, what the kids would do. The kids rode inside the wagon for a lot of the time. All right, my loves, so I hope you enjoyed learning about the pioneers who lived long ago and seeing that they rode in a covered wagon. Say covered wagon. Yeah, and then here is Mr. Birch standing by it. All right, my sweets, let's fold our hands. My turn first. We're going to keep saying the first half of the Lord's Prayer. So fold your hands. My turn first. Our Father in heaven, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Your will be done. On earth as in heaven, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. Amen. Amen. All right, my loves, I will see you tomorrow. We will learn more about the pioneers when they traveled west. I hope you enjoyed this. I love teaching you about this. If we were here in person, I'm sure you would have lots of questions to ask, and I would get to tell you all about it. You have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.